So we have 200 people already assembled, and there's lots of people in the waiting room. So I'd say we've got a really nice crowd here tonight. And even more special, we have just a really tremendous panel of speakers tonight. So let me introduce you to them, and then we'll jump in and we'll just get moving and talking and brainstorming and dishing. So first of all, I want to start with Gwenna Hunter. Gwenna created the Vegans for Black Lives Matter group that many of us here tonight are a part of. Woohoo! And if you aren't a part of it, check it out on Facebook. A really, really wonderful group. She's also the founder of Vegans of LA. She works for Vegan Outreach. She's a powerhouse social media communicator and connector. And Gwenna, I don't have some of your food justice credentials. Can you just fill us in on that little piece of it?
Yes, like earlier and I also work with the Save movement as well.
Save movement as well. What don't you do, Gwenna?
Well, that's enough. Like this year, I'm going to really try to pace myself. I promise. I'm going to pace myself this year.
I'm going to keep you accountable to that.
But through Vegan Outreach, we do a food program called Vegan Food Aid, and we provide produce and healthy hot meals to Black women for wellness, and also with Black Lives Matter, and soon to be Black women farmers of LA. And with Save Movement, we started in December, and we'll be continuing this month working with the Downtown Crenshaw Project. We'll be providing very similar opportunities in the Leimert Park community. So the goal is to just make sure that, we're providing support and relief to communities in need, and also, with the gentle nudge of showing people how delicious, these foods can be without them having to spend the money on their own.
Thank you, Gwenna. You're so very welcome here. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Rhiannon, I'm just going to say we lost Eric. Can you look for his name was Carly on his Zoom. So find him and then tell him how to put his hand up so we can add him back in. Okay. Awesome. All right, let me go back to, I'll skip Eric and I will go on to Calvin. Calvin Neufeld is a social justice advocate, a vegan trans man, and an educational speaker with a passion for human rights, animal rights, and the environment. In 2016, Calvin founded Evolve Our Prison Farms, a coalition of activists and academics advocating the transition of Canada's prison farms from for-profit industrial animal agribusiness, boo, to nonprofit plant-based therapeutic farming. Woo! Calvin is also the lead organizer of the Kingston Veg Fest, having been involved since its inception in 2016. So Calvin, so good to have you here. Okay.
Thank you for having me here.
Oh, awesome. Yay. We have Isaias Hernandez. Isaias was born in Los Angeles, California. As someone who grew up in a community that faced environmental injustices, he grew an interest to learn about his environment, and he had the opportunity to earn his Bachelor of Sciences in Environmental Science at the University of California, Berkeley. And through that, he was able to work on a variety of diversity inclusion work in environmental spaces and in academic research and in creative work. So Isaias, we're so happy to have you. Welcome.
Thank you so much again for having me.
Yay. Okay. And we have up next, PJ Nyman. PJ earned their master's degree in social and political thought from York University with a concentration in ethics and theories of liberation. PJ has taught undergraduate courses in critical sociology, published academic articles in feminist theory and the philosophy of religion, created Vegan Publishers' Why Veganism ebook, formerly a program manager for Animal Play Sanctuary for Farmed Animals. PJ now works as a corporate relations specialist at Mercy for Animals in Toronto here. PJ also sits on the board of Encompass, a capacity building organization that helps animal protection organizations and advocates advance diversity, equity, and inclusion. So PJ, I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you, Kimberly. Very happy to be here.
Yay. And such good news. We have Eric back. Yay. We thought we'd lost you, Eric. And I saved yours for last here. Now, why is Eric showing up Just one second here, Eric. I think I have to put everybody back on Spotlight. Just
Sorry, I found him and I spotlit him because I wanted him to come back on the main.
no problem. I can do this again. I have the dexterity to be able to add everyone. It is not a problem. As long as I don't lose one of my speakers, I'm happy to do any manual labor needed. Okay, add Spotlight and then back to me. Here we go. Okay. and Eric, are you ready? I've saved your bio for last. So Eric Vautour comes from Gwenna First Nation, a small community on the east side of Manitoulin Island. He grew up steeped in his culture from a young age. It was there that he gained a respect for others, the planet, and respect for all animals. It wasn't until recent years when Eric realized he wasn't living in alignment with his values, and he made the decision to go vegan 5 years ago. During this time, he moved to Sudbury and joined the Sudbury Food Policy Council to help establish food sovereignty for the city. Eric recently became a board member with our Toronto Vegetarian Food Bank. We love you, Eric, where he has lent his passionate support as a volunteer for a couple of years now. And he is here to help build bridges between the Indigenous and vegan and animal rights communities. So I love it. Welcome, Eric. So glad to have you here.
Yes, I'm glad to be here. It's a huge pleasure and a big honor.
Oh, okay. Well, let's get into it. Let's dive in. So the first thing I want to talk about, folks, is just that you're all animal activists and very dedicated ones, as we can tell from your bios. But I'd like for you to just share with our community what are the other social justice areas or aspect of your being where you dedicate a lot of heart and energy. And what does, I know this is a big question, and what does intersectionality mean to you? Why do you think it's important for the animal rights movement? So in whatever order, just, what is, your other area of interest and intersectionality? What does it mean to you and why is it important to the animal rights movement? Gwenna, I'm going to pick on you first. You got that flower in your hair. It's just like saying, pick me, pick me.
I had a feeling.
Yeah.
So for me, other areas of interest that I'm a little shy about, but also when I'm not in the animal rights community, I'm very about expanding your consciousness and your capacity to love. Mm-hmm. So for me, that is like, I know it's super new age, but there's really nothing new age about love and compassion. And to me, spreading that in all communities, which is why intersectionality just is common sense for me, because it's not just, when I first got involved in this movement a few years ago, talking about police brutality in the vegan circle or in a group was like, it can get you either kicked out or people just completely ignored you. And so now it's like, I'm so happy now that people are standing up for this and that it's finally a thing, finally. And, some of the issues for me are when people have an issue with intersectionality. There was a post recently about, Black people, fight for yourselves, but it's like, we need your help too. We're all, at the end of the day, we have different complexions, different levels of, melanin, but we're one race, we're one world. And animal liberation doesn't make sense without liberation of people as well. So it's like, to me, you can't have one without the other. You have to be in it for the long haul for all of it.
Love it, Gwenna. Thank you.
Thank you.
Calvin, how about you? You've got a couple of other social justice areas that you have been very active in. Tell us about that and what intersectionality means to you and the animal rights movement as far as you're concerned.
Well, Gwenna put it so well, I can hardly put it any better. But certainly from my experience, it's just been exactly that. It's been a journey of expanding caring and compassion. And I feel that wherever there's a limit to our compassion, then it's not actually true compassion. Compassion knows no bounds. It is a response to suffering wherever we find it. So unless a movement is truly intersectional, I don't believe it's complete. So in my life, it began with, as a child, responding to seeing litter and pollution and feeling that's not right. And it triggered a sense of wanting to do something about that. And then, I grew up to be a queer person. I'm a transgender man. And so the struggles that I went through led me to want to try to make a difference, to heal suffering in others in the ways that I'm able to. And my journey has brought me into the world of prisons and prisoners and farmed animals and the whole intersection of all of these things. And just terrible injustices. And I just found myself in a position with an opportunity to make a difference, and I had to respond to that.
Thank you, Calvin. You brought up such a good point. True compassion has no limits. Like, think about us animal rights activists when people say, how can you be an animal rights activist when there are children starving? And we laugh and we're like, we could do both. Why can't we do both? So it goes the other way around. Yeah. Okay, Eric, I would love for you to share a little bit about, the area that you're speaking of tonight, which is Indigenous rights, and really why you think the intersectionality piece is so important to the animal rights movement.
All right. So I'd like to begin by excuse me, share one of the core tenets of the animal rights movement, and that being rejecting all forms of human discrimination, as well as rejecting speciesism. And this is important because, like the other panelists alluded to already, is we're living in a world of oppression, and it's based on speciesism and many other forms of oppression. And the only way we're going to get rid of this huge machine by building our own machine and connecting the gears together. Like, we're not going to topple this machine but by taking out one gear and like, oh yeah, it's done. No, we got to come together and make all the gears work, or else we're not going to get anywhere as social justice movements, as animal rights movements, it's just not possible to do alone. So I feel like it'd be best if the animal rights movement and Indigenous movement can become strong allies. One of the reasons being we have a strong value in that we view animals as having personhood. So we view them as equal. The best way to describe personhood would be a human is a human, a pig is a pig, but both are considered persons. And in my own culture, being Ojibwe and Anishinaabe, there's a concept we adhere to. It's all my relations. So that means we view all the animals, all the plants, all the bugs, even the rocks and the water, as all imbued with the source or spirit or creator, however you want to refer to that. And also we view animals as being our brothers and sisters. And in the Ojibwe culture, they have a clan system, and each individual is in their respective clan systems. So there's 16, and each of them has to do with a different animal. So there's a fish clan, for example, there's deer clan, there's a wolf clan, there's bear clan. So if you're part of the fish clan, you're not going to go out and like harm another fish or take their life or eat fish. Like, you wouldn't be harming your brother or sister, right? So, and it even extends further for myself. I'm part of all the clan systems. So for me, it really hit home just recently. And I started living in alignment with my values, and I realized I didn't want to be harming any other of my relations anymore.
Eric, beautiful. And that machine that we need to build, can we call it the love machine?
Yes,
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Eric. PJ, how about you? Want to talk a little bit about what some of your other social justice work has been, and why intersectionalism you think is what it is and what's important about it for our movement?
Yes. Happy to. Thank you. So I came to animal advocacy from an academic background, and I came to that academic background with an interest in sociology because of my own experiences of class-based oppression and gender oppression. And so I kind of had an interest early on in understanding why there are systems in place that cause suffering to particular groups. And then my veganism came as an extension of that. So for me, it was like, okay, I care about human issues. I get that oppression is wrong. And now I need to extend this to non-humans. And I think I started to think about, so for me, the interconnections of oppression have kind of been there all along in my mind. And I see under acknowledging the interconnections of oppressions in our work as animal advocates as so important, in part to build a diverse and powerful social movement. So some of the interest in intersectionality for me is in building an effective social movement. And then the other side of it is also because oppressions themselves are interconnected. You know, like we don't have like animal abuse over here and like patriarchy and toxic masculinity over here and white supremacy over here. Like we actually have this unified dominant worldview that is privileging and elevating like a particular ideal of like what we're supposed to be. And many of us don't belong to that for various reasons based on, you know, our place in society, our species and so forth. And so for me, it's, you know, about addressing like as broad a sense of oppression as possible because it's disadvantaging and harming so many people and species.
Oh, PJ, so well put. Thank you so much. Excellent. And don't, folks, don't be afraid. You can keep your microphone on if you want. Like I said, unless there's loud noise behind you, we'd love for you to be heard and laugh, applaud, whatever you want to do. Isaias, please, we would love to hear from you. Tell us a little bit about the social justice issues that you're involved in outside of animal rights, and a little bit about why you think intersectionality is so important to our movement.
Yeah, I think for me, it started at a young age, especially with my community experiencing environmental injustices in LA and asking these critical questions of why communities are designed this way. And so as I got deeper into doing environmental racism work and justice work throughout college, I realized for me, the importance of understanding the links between industrial agriculture, environmental racism, and the oppression that animals and humans face. And so I think for me, understanding that we are born in a society that upholds oppressive systems under white supremacy is how can I actively work to become anti-species and anti-racist at the same time, knowing the fact that I have not met a single individual that is 100% anti-species nor anti-racist in this society. And so I think for me, education has provided that tool to empower many people to have these uncomfortable conversations and uncomfortable truths with themselves, because unlearning is a horrible process, but it's also beautiful at the end once you're able to fight for the justice of life itself and not in an extension and also intertwining with non-human animals. And so for me, my position as an educator was to really provide these types of interconnections and to understand how each industry, whether it be animal agriculture, the fast fashion industry, how are these extractive systems upholding the oppression of living beings?
Wow. And how old were you, Isaias, when you started this work?
Yeah, I was 17 actually when I started off in high school, and it extended to going into college. And throughout college, obviously I got a real full-time job, so I kind of stopped, and that's when I realized my page, Queerbound Vegan, was to provide accessible forms of environmental education for anyone who comes from any type of background to learn about the introductory forms of environmentalism.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you, Isaias. Okay, well, I want to dish a little bit now. First of all, I just want to tell you that our community is just loving you. All of you are just being applauded here in the chat. I'll share some of the comments in a bit. But I'd love to have you all guide us folks in AJA who might not yet be active, and the key word is active allies or supporters of the group or the movement that you're talking about, because everyone that is here is obviously very interested in stepping up in a more powerful way. So I'd love to hear from you. What are some of the things that you see the AR movement or individuals within the animal rights movement not getting quite right when it comes to relating to or collaborating with this other social justice movement? We'll mix it up a little bit. I'd love to start with Kelvin this time. Kelvin, what are some of the boo-boos that are happening? What are some of the things that are feeling that are pretty damaging?
Well, first of all, I just applaud what everybody is doing. We're all trying our best and doing the best we can, and we all make mistakes. If there are some areas to improve based on my experience, is division.
I love how diplomatic you are, first of all, Kelvin. That's amazing. If there are areas we would improve.
This is the Canadian in me, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, there is a lot of division and disconnectedness, and that's why intersectionality is so fundamentally important, because we are compromised when we are doing siloed work and when we feel bitterness towards one movement, perhaps, trotting into our territory, or if we don't allow ourselves to listen to what other people have to say about their movements and understand and deepen our understanding and our ability to care about these other issues, because they are all connected. So, when I became involved in Evolve Our Prison Farms, and I, had done a lot in the animal world and supporting farmed animal sanctuaries and stuff like that, and then entering into this world of prisons and prisoners, and it opened my eyes to a lot of human rights abuses in the prison system, and then Indigenous issues as well. In Canada, over 30% of the federal prison population is Indigenous, despite being less than 5% of the general population. So there are many layers of oppression, intersectionality, and many people in the animal advocacy world were uncomfortable to step into this world of standing up for the human rights of our incarcerated brothers and sisters. Many of them themselves have been victims of crime, as have most prisoners as well. So I understand why people might be hesitant to start defending a category of people who are stigmatized and oppressed. And yet this is exactly what happens in the animal world, that we see a category of animals who we see as food animals, and therefore are not entitled to their lives, to their bodies, to their babies. That's the way people look at farmed animals, and that's the way people look at prisoners. They belong to a category of people that is less deserving. And the same with being a queer person or a trans person. You belong to a category perhaps that isn't deserving of dignity or healthcare or respect. So we have to break down all of these walls and see the connections between them and open our hearts as well as our eyes.
Thank you, Kelvin. Okay, so we're going to go from the polite Canadian to Gwenna. Gwenna, where are people stepping in it? Where are they stepping in it around Black Lives Matter?
Well, Calvin, thank you for what you just said, because, and even with me being a Black woman, it wasn't really until last year that I allowed myself to really feel and not suppress all the racism and all the other things, because it's a full-time job. When you get into this and you start advocating and, speaking up, like, it can literally take over your reality. And so for me, one of my coping mechanisms was, using other sources of, shopping, food, sex, anything to distract from having to deal with how barbaric this planet would feel. Being on. So when I created the group Vegans for Black Lives Matter, I really didn't even want to create a group, because I don't I'm the friendliest, unfriendly person you'll ever meet. I'm the friendliest, unfriendliest person you'll ever meet. So it's like, okay, I don't really want to deal with people, but something just felt right. And just observing on the Black side, on the white side, there was so much guilt that came from white people in the group. And that can be toxic as well, because it's like, it's okay to feel that, but let's move out of that and move into action. From Black people, there was a lot of anger and rage and wanting to take it out on anybody that looked white. And so with that, it's like, okay, you feel that, but let's move from that and move into action and into a solution. So I would say there's so many different things that I could hit on, but I would say some of the more recent would probably be where people are just not being respectful of language. And I know, like, no one owns words. Like, we're all entitled to say whatever we want. No one has a right, to tell someone what they can and can't say. However, because we're in this type of community that is involved with compassion and love and liberation, if you have a community that's saying, hey, this is kind of breaking my heart, this is hurting, can you just pump the brakes and let's, what's the problem? I came into this movement, I went vegan after watching Dairy is Scary. And my first connection to that was slavery. Now I can say that because, but that is what I felt in my heart. I'm like, that is the same blueprint as slavery. But even as a Black woman, I don't go around just using that, randomly. I'm very careful because these type of words are triggering. We haven't healed yet. That's the key. We have not healed. So we got these scabs and these open wounds, and we're throwing salt and pepper and all types of things onto them and just reopening them. And that's why there's so much still division, because we're still not healing. And we can heal each other by just saying, hey, okay, even though I feel this way, I'll change my words because we have a bigger thing that we need to solve. It's that simple.
Yeah. Thank you, Gwenna. And Gwenna, Melanie said, yes, Gwenna, with the Holocaust comparisons as well. As a Jew, this has been really difficult to deal with. So I think you struck a chord that's important. Isaias, how about you? Tell us a little bit about where we're going wrong in environmental justice.
Yeah, I think you can have good intention and cause harm. Both can be true. And I think that, but your intention does not negate like your impact and harm cause and your accountability. And so I think for me, sorry about that, I think for me, what happens in the environmental justice movement is we see harmful language, and I think language can be both, sorry about that, my thing keeps freezing. Language can be both very liberating and very dangerous. And so when I say that, is that language itself can empower and educate those, but also language and rhetoric that is used for harmful comparisons or types of words, it can fuel others, and mostly those who are extremists. And I present this example in the environmental justice because of the terminology eco-fascism that was used a lot during Trump's presidency, that talked about the idea that people of color were stealing natural resources. And even though the term itself and the people who were spreading this term did not have intent to harm or physically take someone's life, it did extend to extremists using that as a justification to murder and mass shoot Black, Indigenous people of color. And so there is no accountability for those who speak on that language or fuel that language. And just because they are not the ones, I know that they would not cause harm, doesn't mean that their own community members have different intentions and different meanings to those words. And so I think for me, what I would hope is that we constantly learn and try to develop new language. Even myself, I'm guilty of using this harmful terminology when I first went vegan. And I think that it's no one will ever die from unlearning something. No one ever is dead from learning something new or about history or learning about anti-oppression of human and non-human animals, because we all contribute to it. And I think that at the end of the day, who are we to point fingers about ourselves when we're still doing the work? And we have to, I think, recognize that.
No one will ever die from unlearning. Very, very good. Thank you. PJ, how about you? Where are we going wrong? Or I won't say wrong. Where are we not doing a good job of supporting gender equity in the animal rights movement? Can you give some examples or some ideas?
I can.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one thing I think is something I care about a lot and have been addressing in my own work and in part with Encompass has brought this to light is representation in our movement, in the vegan movement, in the animal rights movement. We see that leadership, for example, at a lot of major animal protection organizations is very white and very dominated by cis men. When the demographics of our movement very much show that we are 75% or more women. And also, so I think that just there's been an issue of perpetuating sexist oppression in the workplace in nonprofit organizations that are devoted to animal advocacy. So I would say movement representation is one area that we could do better at when it comes to gender equity. And kind of connected to that is, I think, an assumption that we find throughout the vegan movement that being vegan means we're anti-oppressive, that like if we can extend our compassion all the way to animals, we're like implicitly including all the human groups in there too. And that's like simply not the case. There are sexist vegans, there are racist vegans, there are homophobic, transphobic, ableist, classist vegans, and so forth. And so, something that we can do is broaden our scope of how we're approaching vegan advocacy so that we are trying to include other anti-oppressive work in there. So the goal is less to just like make more vegans, but to spread a vegan message that is like inherently more anti-oppressive and is combating multiple systems of oppression at the same time. And a way I like to think about this, something that's like really helped me, this comes from ASCO, is this idea that we need to move away from advocating for the end of animal consumption and more toward the idea of ending animal oppression. And I feel like that reframing can be really a really helpful like pivot point.
Yes. Great ideas, PJ. They're saying in there. Yeah, I'm already looking at the clock and I'm like, I want this to go on for 3 hours, but I will contain myself. Okay. Eric, can you give us a little bit of advice how, maybe us as non-Indigenous animal advocates can be better supporters of Indigenous peoples and rights? Like, what are we not doing well as a movement when it comes to Indigenous folks? And do you have any suggestions around how to shift this?
Yeah, I did have some suggestions, and all the other panelists nailed it on the head perfectly, how intersectionality is really important. And so yeah, an example I would like to bring up in a way that the animal rights movement isn't really doing a justice and being an ally for the Indigenous rights movement is in regards to Aboriginal people exercising their treaty rights and Aboriginal rights in Canada and worldwide. So recently in Ontario, there's been a scheduled deer hunt. So it's been in the Short Hills Provincial Park starting in 2013, and they have it every year. And the dates are posted, and so people know that the park is closed down, and they have police on site to regulate it, and they also have conservation officers there as well to make sure that everything is legitimized and there's no wrongdoing while this hunt is proceeding. But ever since 2013, when they've been having these hunts, there's been protests from the animal rights movement. And so they've had people there protesting, Aboriginal people exercising their treaty rights and their cultural responsibilities. And I would like to start off by saying, like, like I understand and I empathize with Indigenous people who have to hunt for subsistence. I don't agree with hunting, obviously, me being animal rights vegan. But I I understand that there are still some Indigenous people living that way and aren't um, like aren't anyways. So what I wanted to say was that it's not a good focus of our energy. And for animal rights movement advocates, and it's better to have Indigenous people who are actually opposed to this, as myself or any other Indigenous people, because we do better work in our own communities, and our voices are more heard and have more meaning in our respective communities. Aboriginal rights and other social justice movements, they're more heard and it's more meaningful when it comes from someone in the community. So just a small piece of advice I would like to say, yeah, just amplify Indigenous voices or other social justice movements and get behind them, support them, give them your financial support, your emotional support, and physical support. I mean, not so much now because of COVID, but just show up for them and support them in any way you can.
Eric, thank you. Tell me, Eric, I kind of go and tell me if I'm on the right track at all. I kind of go by the idea that I don't like to see any animals hurt or killed. But until all the white and privileged people in the world are vegan, I don't really feel like I have any business going after marginalized groups to go vegan. I feel like they're the last people. Maybe, maybe if the whole rest of the world is vegan, then I'm going to have a chat. But until then, I feel like it's hands off. Is that something that could be an approach, or is there something to correct around that?
Yeah, I feel like that's the best way to engage with Aboriginal people and other marginalized groups who still have a strong connection to their culture. And that's the thing, culture is evolving, and soon enough it's going to come to a point where it's evolved past the need for subsistence hunting, because there's so much abundance now. We don't need to rely on killing or harming animals for food. And part of being in my enemies in Ojibwe culture, the animal isn't just killed, and there is no glorification of killing animals in our culture like there is with colonial hunters who glorify the sport. And well, they call it a sport, like it's disgusting. But anyways, in Ojibwe culture, they are treated with the utmost respect, and because they're viewed as part of our relations, we treat them with most respect and gratitude. They're given an offering of tobacco, which honors and celebrates their life. Also, sorry. Yeah. So I feel like, and when there isn't going to become a need for it anymore, because back in the day we needed them for warmth and for food and for shelter and for energy and the pure life source which they are able to offer their help for. And I feel like they've helped Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people for ages, but it's time for us to help them now. They need our help, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing.
And we're so glad you are, Eric. Thank you. So I want to ask, I was asking what's not going quite right, but I'm really curious to find out if if you have examples of when animal rights groups or initiatives or individuals that you've seen or encountered have been doing something really well in terms of collaborating or supporting the movement or the group that you're involved in particularly. Let's start with Isaias. Is there any, are there examples or are there things that are going on that with collaboration that you're really liking?
You know, I really support an organization named Food Empowerment Project, and they work at the intersections between humans and non-human animals and advocate for undocumented farm workers who currently have high levels of PTSD, are exposed to toxic chemicals, and have a lot of mental trauma because of the fear of deportation, and a lot of other lack of resources available to them. And so part of that too with Food Empowerment Project is recognizing the industrialized agriculture of how harmful it is for communities of color, but how horrific also it is for animals. And so this, I think for me, is a perfect example that got me to go vegan in college when I learned about Food Empowerment Project, because I realized when I had, you know, I guess glimpses of organizations like PETA and other things that were known to be sued by a lot of institutions and governments globally, it almost seemed as if, you know, I don't know which to really choose or which to really, what is the best thing for me. And so for me, recognizing how organizations can adopt this intersectional approach while also not stealing their work, because that has happened with a lot of animal welfare organizations co-opting intersectionality or stealing people's works from BIPOC orgs, is to redistribute their wealth and resources to them. And I think that I am a heavy advocate and supporter and donator to the Food Empowerment Project because I truly believe they're women of color owned org and ran by an amazing individual. And I think that we need to really incorporate that with people in this movement. And also Genesis Butler, who has been doing so much amazing work with especially youth and incorporating intersectionality of environmental justice in her work. So really huge congrats to a lot of the youth that are fighting these agricultural industries and the policies and subsidies that are going into our tax dollars into the dairy industry. And how do I divest from that?
Excellent. So I think that's somebody put it in the chat if somebody wants to check that out, that recommendation out from Isaias. Anyone else here have an example of have seen stuff that you thought, yeah, that's doing it right as far as collaboration with these two groups that I'm involved in? Anyone else want to jump in with that?
Yeah, I'll jump in. So I've been working with vegan outreach for a few years, and we've pivoted and done different things like many times. But what we've done lately in the past, 8-9 months has been some of the most proudest work that I've been a part of since I've been in this movement. And, when the pandemic hit, we were kind of out of options because most of our work involved being in front of people and large crowds of people. And we ended up getting funding to be able to work with some of these groups. And I remember I had really admired, the work that the Black Lives Matter Los Angeles chapter was doing and just how unified they were. And I'm like, I would love to be able to, because they're heroes, they're helping change the planet. I would love to be able to provide support to them and give their community groceries and hot food every month. And I was so like, because a lot of organizations are scared of being connected with a very powerful Black movement. And so my concern was that, there would be fear of, oh, the funders won't like it or this. And when I presented it and they're like, heck yeah, let's do it. I'm like, yes. So, working with them, I'm now a member of Black Lives Matter LA, and just being a part of that community, which is very loving and very united, and very women driven as well. So just being a part of that and having that collaboration. And, like I said, us working with Black Women for Wellness, that's another amazing organization that's for the empowerment of Black women and their health and wellness, mentally and physically. So yeah, I just wanted to give props to Vegan Outreach because, and not just with my project, we have someone in New Mexico that is basically feeding the entire Navajo Nation. We have people in Northern California that are working with senior communities, feeding undocumented workers. We have people that are doing things all over the country for communities that just really need and deserve our support. So yeah, it's been really, really good, and we're getting it right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you are excellent. Kelvin, I'm not going to allow you to talk about anything about your organization because there is not a more intersectional kind of initiative that I've heard of than this. And I'd love to find out a little bit more about what the reaction has been from various contingents on it.
Thank you, Kimberly. It's been a struggle, to be honest. I've been doing this for 5 years, and it has been a real challenge to get other groups to engage. And one of the major barriers has been that we are intersectional, and we didn't do this out of for any strategic purpose. It was just natural. It began with a proposal for what the new prison farms could look like when they come. The government said they were bringing prison farms back and looked for public input. And we thought, well, we've got an idea, plant-based agriculture. And if working with animals is a core value, as the government said, then we proposed a recognized model of animal-assisted therapy. It simply made sense as the best possible model for the return of the prison farms. And then it turned out that the government was doing something entirely different, and they had fully intended to do industrial animal agriculture to sell products to the private sector. And this introduces human rights violations. And this journey has brought me into many prisons, talking to prisoners, because I didn't want to be there saying, this is what I think prison farms should be, without actually talking to prisoners and finding out what their lives are like and what they would like to see and what programming is like in prisons. And so it just brought me down this road. And when a lot of the animal advocacy community hesitated around the prisoner justice angle of this campaign, it was unfortunate, but we can't change that because that is absolutely integral. We cannot be here. Prisoners, like so many marginalized communities, are used to people coming in and trying to co-opt their interest or speak for them without actually speaking with them. And we didn't want to be another group that takes a prison issue and tries to advance some unrelated agenda on the backs of oppressed peoples. So we just, took, it was just important to do it, even though we lost support. And we couldn't gain support from the abolitionist communities. So there are entire communities of people who are working towards decarceral futures away from cages, and want to see the prison system as it is abolished. And I fully understand why. And they were hesitant to align with Evolve Our Prison Farms because they saw us as animal activists, or as we've been described as a vegan group, even though we represent people who come from all walks of life and all different personal choices and dietary ethics. But they labeled us as vegan. And so the abolitionists wouldn't support. Environmentalists don't want to go there because a lot of environmentalists don't want to acknowledge the contribution that animal agriculture makes to the climate crisis, however enormous it is. And so everybody being divided, it left us in a very solitary place. But we were still right, and we were determined that this is the right way to do it, popular or not. What's wrong is wrong, and what's right is right. And speaking up for the human rights of our incarcerated brothers and sisters is very important. They are a part of our society. Is the dusty, neglected corner of our society. And if we overlook that, then what good is anything else that we are doing? And I've also done work, around trans veganism. I've written about that, sort of in the vein of Marjorie Spiegel writing about the dreaded comparison, the comparison between human and animal slavery. And then Carol J. Adams writing way back in the 1990s, I think, calling for a feminist vegetarian alliance. You can't be a feminist and not be a vegetarian or a vegan. And similarly, I felt that the idea of trans veganism is crucial, because how can any form of anti-oppression activism be complete without veganism at the heart of it? And anybody who has experienced oppression, how can we hope to end oppression without first ending it in ourselves? And to be the first to step off that ladder of hierarchy that says that it's okay for me to engage in the oppression of any other. That's the end of oppression, by ending it in ourselves first. So we tried very hard to make Evolve Our Prison Farms truly intersectional, not as a strategy because it hasn't worked to our advantage, but because we believe it's the right thing to do.
Oh, yes. Calvin for Prime Minister. Love it. Yeah, you're getting lots of applause out there, Calvin. Incredible. This is, yeah. And he's still smiling. You're an inspiration, Calvin. And Calvin, we'll just tease before we're done this panel tonight. We as Animal Justice Academy are going to get behind a very important initiative that Evolve Our Prison Farms is doing. So this is our action for this week as an academy, as a community. We're going to go hard, and we are going to put this initiative on the map. So thank you, Calvin.
Thank you.
We'll explain later. We'll give you all the details. PJ or Eric, do you have anything you want to contribute around some good examples, things that you think are going well as far as the collaborations with animal rights movement? PJ?
I'm happy to share. Yeah, I'm hard to follow, Calvin. That was amazing. Thank you.
We all gotta cool down a little.
Yeah, so an example that stands out to me is something done right that takes an intersectional approach, addresses gender and queer issues, is Vine Sanctuary in Vermont. So Vine Sanctuary is an LGBTQ-run farmed animal sanctuary. And what's really interesting about their work, in addition to that fact alone, which is actually fairly rare in the sanctuary movement, is that the way they approach their advocacy, the way they tell stories about the animals in their care, the way they put out information about veganism, it has this like built-in understanding that there's a connection between patriarchy, toxic masculinity, and meat and abusing animals. And so having like this approach is kind of built in from the beginning because the organization is queer founded. And so I think that's of value. I think when we start from an approach that is focused on non-human animals, and then we try to add on issues like gender or race or so forth, it seems challenging because we're starting with this like single issue lens and then trying to add on to it. And so I like their approach that's sort of starting by addressing the ways that patriarchy and toxic masculinity impact marginalized genders and non-humans. And kind of building on that too, another example is when I worked at another sanctuary, Animal Place in Northern California, we hosted a pride event at the sanctuary. And that was a pretty cool opportunity to bring groups together who wouldn't have necessarily intersected. So the name of the previous, I'm just seeing questions pop up. The first sanctuary I mentioned that's LGBTQ run is Vine Sanctuary in Vermont. And then the pride event was hosted at Animal Place. And I borrowed some ideas from Vine for doing that. And basically what we were able to do is bring queer people to a sanctuary, to a farmed animal sanctuary who may otherwise not have gone, and then expose vegans who were many of whom were not queer to a queer focused talk and a vegan potluck. So it's just kind of a sort of lighter example of how we can bring groups together and address multiple issues at the same time.
Brilliant, PJ. Thank you. Thank you. Eric, do you have any examples that you've seen of where the animal rights movement has done, or even individuals, groups, initiatives have done some good collaborating with the Indigenous movement?
Yeah, so there's one example here in Canada. So Indigenous Senator Murray Sinclair has introduced a bill to the Senate. It's called Bill S-218, or better known as the Jane Goodall Act. And through this act, they're looking to protect wildlife such as great apes, elephants, and cetacean. So like many of our dolphin relatives and like whales. They're looking to end the exploitation and importation of these animals. And they also, so Senator Murray Sinclair also brought this up through an Indigenous lens. And in the preamble, he mentions all my relations. And this is a really good example of drawing parallels between the two movements and how it's working in protection of these wildlife.
Yeah, and we love Senator Murray Sinclair. For the Americans out here, he was he championed the bill that got whales and dolphins banned from captivity. So so now he's going after elephants and he's going after great apes. And I love Senator Sinclair. He really talks about how we totally intersect with the animal protection thing, and so that there's so many opportunities that Indigenous folks can put forward in Canada, especially that we as animal rights activists might not be able to put forth. So thank you, Eric. That's excellent. And we're going to go to questions in a second, but this is a question that's sort of come up in the group a little bit, and I really wanted to put it out to you folks. That there is a little bit of a trend happening that some AR folks are getting, can we say, a little overzealous in policing other folks around intersectionality, and maybe that's not possible. So I'd love to know whether you've seen that, whether that is an experience for you. I heard Gwenna in a talk in the Vegans for Black Lives Matter group talking about the woke Olympics, everybody competing for the woke Olympics, and then there's this cancel culture that's happening pretty rampantly too. So I just love to hear your thoughts on if there's too far, not enough, where we're landing in terms of this. Does anybody want to jump in on this?
I'll jump in on that one.
Yeah.
And I like to speak on both sides because I do believe in trying to be fair. I love a good redemption story. So, I have friends that have confided in me and told me that, growing up, they were racist and it's how they were brought up. And I respect honesty and evolution. Like if you have a seedy past or anything like that and you're evolving, that is totally okay with me. Like I hold that in high honor and in high regard. To me, those are the best forms of healers, because that's really what we need more in this movement, are more healers and less performers. So to say, on the side that mostly I represent, people of color, I think we can do a better job of being a little more forgiving and giving people a little bit more room to maybe explain themselves. But also at the same time, there have been situations, without me naming names, where people have been found to have said something really hurtful and painful, and their way of making up for it is to defend it and to still be very not really apologetic. To me, when things happen in this movement and you have to apologize, the best way to apologize is to apologize. And that doesn't happen often. Most of the people that I find that are very anti-intersectional, I don't even, when I'm checking them out, or if I decide to make room or time for it, I don't really even see that they even have friends of color or that are, Black people in their personal lives. Now, they may have done a march and walked next to somebody, but that's not a friendship. That's just some type of relationship or some type of engagement. So most of these people don't even have like Black friends in their lives, or they don't even live an intersectional life. Like, to me, you need to be living an intersectional life. Like, why don't you have any Black friends? Why don't you have any Indigenous friends? Why don't you have this in your life? Kind of like how Calvin said, like, you know, it starts with you. Like, I'm a heal yourself, heal the planet type of person. Like, you got to work on yourself. And a lot of these people don't work on themselves because everyone is worshiping them, telling them that they're right. You know, in this movement, we do a lot of worshiping. I did it in the beginning. I'm super guilty of that. When I first got in this movement, I just was like, because I think it was something that PJ, you said it, and it was so funny because when I first became vegan, I thought that because people crossed over into loving animals, I was like, wait a minute, I just hit gold. Like, they love animals, so I know they love me and they love people and all this. And I quickly found that that was not the case. They just skipped. So, you know, it's like I said earlier, like, you know, our culture is still hurting and still in pain. And, you know, it costs you nothing just to put on a full stop, even if it doesn't make sense to you, it just for the sake of unity and to stop another person from being upset and hurting. You know, just collaborate. You know, collaborate doesn't mean that you have to give up your beliefs or you have to change your whole form of activism. And maybe you don't want to be about the Black Lives Matter movement. Maybe you want to be with the ladies that like to stitch sweaters and you want to help bring it to them, or you want to, you know, like, find your thing. But we got to evolve out of just the straightforward, because like I said, it's the whole, like, we need this whole thing in order to make it work. It won't work with just one form.
Amazing. Yeah. There's calls, Gwenna, come to Canada.
I would love, now if it didn't, I've been to Canada before. I love the culture in Canada. I'm not doing snow though. I'm done with that.
Yeah, there's
but otherwise I would be on the first plane.
I know. Canada's so awesome, except for the 6 months of winter. Is there anyone else who wants to weigh in on this? And by the way, I just want to mention that, where did I see it? I know. Someone said, should we even use the term cancel culture since it is used by racist people to justify their bad behavior? You know, that is a good point. I'm not sure. It's I'd love to hear from you on that. But is there anybody else that wants to weigh into this idea of can people get a little too overzealous? What do we do when maybe somebody looks like they have good intentions, but they're not quite doing it right? Is there a better way? Does anybody have any suggestions? Isaias?
I personally think, you know, cancel culture, from, I've done a lot of histories too, is like some of it stems from queer and trans communities, and where they just held people accountable. It wasn't about siloing you out. It was more about bringing in attention into awareness. The thing is the fact that I think when people are experiencing some type of cancel culture, they victimize themselves instantly. And they will say, like, I'm not racist, I'm not specious. And, you know, at the end of the day, we all do contribute to forms of oppression. And that is something that I have to realize to myself. And when statements are said, you know, part of me as a person of color, when I hear harmful things, it hurts me. But on the other side, when I look at it through a specious lens, it's like, yeah, you do have to unlearn a lot of those things too, that you do contribute to speciesism. And that's something that's a different conversation. But I think that accountability is not violence. Accountability is just bringing to light of, like, these are some genuine concerns of what you've been doing the past X amount of years, or your work. Is there any way that we can have a more critical conversation about this, rather than like, no, this is how I've been doing my work and it's effective, and here are my followers and my community to validate that. And that silos out those types of experiences. And so I think that for me on my end, you know, as a person of color and who's queer, like, it's not my responsibility no more to extend myself to white folks that are going to label me as anti-white, anti-men, say a lot of hurtful things. And I think allies, regardless if you're white or not, need to step up and to ask yourselves, like, if these are your friends, you need to hold them accountable, because they're more willing to talk to you. And this comes easily, conversation from our parents or our siblings. They've all said problematic things. They've said disrespectful things that you're like, you shouldn't be saying that. And you have to have these rough conversations with them, because they won't grow from it, and they'll continue to validate that behavior. So you're just feeling them. And so I think that in creating intersectional movement, it's not about, asking people, like Gwenna said, like, we're not asking people to learn all about these things. We're asking them to acknowledge it and to be aware, but you can continue doing your animal rights activism. Like, no one's saying that you can't do it. It's just to be aware of these systems, rather than saying, no, that's human supremacist thinking, goodbye. And so we can't move from those conversations. And so I think for me, it's no longer about talking to those folks. I think that's a job for every ally to do, but rather to hold space when they're ready to come back to me, rather than labeling me these harmful terms.
Thank you, Isaias. Anybody else want to weigh in on this? Yeah, you're like not touching it with a 10-foot pole.
I do want to acknowledge what Isaiah said. Like, I think that was really beautiful about holding space, and allowing our allies to do the work. Because sometimes in the group, someone will come in and start a huge fire, and sometimes the Black people feel like they have to defend, and I'm like, no, let our white brothers and sisters do the work. Like, just sit on back, let them handle it, because oftentimes it's easier to take criticism and listen if it comes from someone that looks like you. That's just how it is. Yeah. And but I love what you said about holding space for people, because there's situations where I've seen where someone has been called out and it's gone viral. I mean, it's happening now. And to me, if that person comes back and says, you know what, I got it wrong, it's like, come on back home, honey. It's like the door is always open, because again, our movement is about love and compassion. And so we should always keep that in the back of our head. Well, not in the back of our heads. We should always remember that in everything that we do.
Thank you, Gwenna. Yeah, it's nice to welcome people home.
I think, sorry, I don't know if I could jump in.
Go for it, PJ. Absolutely.
Okay. I think that's something I kind of feel like called upon to say to other white vegans, because I know this is something that I've had to grapple with myself, is that I think we can get particularly defensive when our advocacy is challenged, because when you go vegan, the animals are not going to hold us accountable. It's almost like veganism is an appealing framework for white liberals, precisely because the animals are not going to tell us if we're doing it okay or not. And so in some ways, like, people who go vegan, like when white people go vegan, there's not an expectation that there's going to be accountability even. And so I think it's like a really important step to recognize that we're working with other people in a social movement, and that we can be like we will make mistakes and things will be brought to our attention. And it's really important to be open to that, and to kind of assume that that is going to happen.
Such a good point, PJ. And I'm going to call for questions. I'm sorry, we've gone so late, but we were just having such a wonderful convo here. If you have questions for our panel, please feel free to do the star Q, and we'll get to at least a couple of them. But while we're waiting on that, Jamie, we lost you. You want to put your hand up, raise your hand again, so we can get you in here and telling us about what's been happening in the chat? Okay, well, while we're waiting for Jamie, is there, do you have any advice for some of us more fragile white folks who how to deal when that shame sort of hits us? How to deal? Yes, Gwenna, please.
My inbox stays busy from anytime that someone's feelings that is white gets hurt. And it's usually 99.9% of the time, and I'm referring to the group Vegans for Black Lives Matter, their feelings usually get hurt by another white person. And then they'll message me and get upset with me and say the group is racist, or I'm leaving your group. That all this bells and whistles going on to let me know that they're leaving the group.
Nobody ever leaves. They always have to announce they're leaving, right?
Gosh. and they'll DM me and let me know they're unfriending me and block. Oh, crazy! And I'm like, I didn't have anything to do with the conversation. But one thing that I keep finding as a consistent pattern, and I felt the energy of this when the group first started. I felt the white guilt and the pain from finally realizing that we've been telling you the truth all along about police brutality and all these things going on. But what I find is even in solidarity, when a white person sometimes gets corrected, it's not always gonna, like, unity isn't always beautiful. It's not always holding hands and we're skipping in the field and now we're one and racism is over. Like, this shit can hurt. You know what I mean? Like, it's painful. We're still learning each other. We're still going through it. You know, things aren't on equal playing field just because we have a new person in office. Like, we still have work to do. So what I find oftentimes when white people get their feelings hurt, it's hard for them to stand in it. And the first thing that they usually do is run and take off and say, I'm done. And to me, that's not being an ally. You got to be able to stand in the pain, because this is what Black people do all day. We know how to stand in it. We know how to, you know, we've mastered this thing and how to maneuver. I'm not saying that it's healthy or it's the best thing to do, but we know how to do it. That's why I say, yes, sit with the discomfort, because it's not always going to come out as, okay, Sarah, well, when you said that, it really made me feel. Sometimes it's going to come out like, hey, watch your mouth. I need you to understand this, but just try, if you can, to build up your emotional core, because we need people that are strong. If a revolution starts tomorrow, I don't want to be next to somebody who runs out because, you know, somebody said, hey, that's not okay to say, and all of a sudden you took off. I want to be with the strong person that can take it, because this is not a very gentle world. This is a harsh world, and things are going to be said to you harshly. So if your feelings get hurt, just try to understand that it comes from years of maybe resentment and pain, and maybe you caught that person at the wrong time, or maybe they just didn't feel like being nice to you, but just don't run away. Try to hang in there if you can.
Let's like all roll in the messiness of it all. Like let's roll around in it.
Yeah, let's roll around in it. And it's life. So if you're running from this, what else are you running from? You know, in your own life. So like, at least try to use this as a way to just build your emotional core and stand in unity with us, even when it's not fun and we're not agreeing on everything.
So, Jamie, but first of all, before we launch into the questions, panelists, are you okay to stay a few extra minutes, maybe 10 extra minutes? Would that be okay with you, or you have a tight timeline? You're okay. Okay. There's such good stuff happening here. Jamie, come on. I'm gonna spotlight you here and add spotlight. Jamie, what's happening in the chat? It looks like there's just so much love happening there.
A lot's going on. We have a few first timers, which is good. Claudio, shout out. Blessing as well. We have reoccurring faces who have been here for every one of our live panels. Stephanie Martin, Adam Nora, Jen Black. We also have Jenny McQueen is in there. Jenny is, for those who don't know, she's going to be a panelist coming up. Hey, Jenny.
The disruptor, Jenny McQueen, the disruptor.
She's great. Cheyenne, she posted a good comment, actually. Says, I think I'm going to learn so much from everyone in this panel. I have always been so focused on animals because I always bonded with them more than humans. Sometimes animal suffering blocks my mind from other movements. So I'm looking forward to learning how other movements help the animal rights movement. And I think that's something that we touched on today with our panel. And can I just say, like, this is the 4th live panel that we've done. And all of our panelists have been so informative and so diverse in their fields. And it's just, I've learned so much from it. And it's only week 2. So I'm looking forward to how the next.
We're going to blow your mind before the end of this, Jamie.
Thank you to Neil and the Animal Justice team for putting this together, because it's honestly been such a great learning experience.
Oh, thank you, Jamie. So, okay, a few things, a couple of questions we're going to try and fit in here. Kelvin, what are the inmates' responses to the idea of factory farming versus the other ideas you propose? Do they not have any say?
Well, they don't have any say, but we have given them a say. We have sent in feedback forms. We've received feedback from probably about 200 federal inmates so far. The first feedback that we issued, 75% voted in favor of plant-based agriculture and animal-assisted therapy instead of dairy operations. But that was before it was known that this was going to be an intensive livestock operation. So when we talk to prisoners about what's really happening, you can feel the upset and the anger. It's like a mirror is being held up to them. They are treated as products, as you know, they know what it's like to be caged. They know what it's like to be separated from their families. They know what it's like to be oppressed. And to be seen as less than, and then to have to, the thought of having to work with animals in exactly the same conditions, like a dark mirror of their own conditions. They don't want it. And what we're actually seeing is that there aren't a lot of prisoners who are participating so far. They've started trying to roll out the farms. They haven't built the intensive livestock operation yet. That's coming very soon. But they're not getting a lot of volunteers and participants. And when I do go in and talk to inmates, they actually love what we've proposed. They get excited at the idea. And I'm told that this is actually quite unusual to get large numbers of prisoners excited at an idea. But they've written articles about sharing the vision that prisoners can lead the way to a better future by modeling farming for the future and taking care of the land. And that also ties into also the indigenous perspectives and animals as our relations and our brothers and our sisters. And the idea of setting up that kind of relationship towards animals, which is a colonial relationship, the owning of animals, the farming of animals, the consumption of animals, is very settler colonial. And it's really imperative that we not reproduce colonial relations on prison farms in the 21st century. So prisoners get it, and we hear story after story of animals that they knew as children, of their protectiveness towards animals that have come into the prison, whether it's a chipmunk or a cat. They are highly protective of animals because they know what it's like to be without power and to be vulnerable and to know suffering and pain. So we need to be actually fostering that natural empathy and protectiveness and not introducing a prison farm model that's going to accomplish the very opposite of desensitizing and treating animals the way that prisoners are treated.
Thank you, Calvin. Eric, Debbie is asking, sorry, I just lost it. How many more of white man's high-tech weaponry can be brought against the animal brothers and sisters, I guess, and it still be considered traditional?
Yeah, thanks, Terry, for your question. I actually was going through the chat quickly. I did see that question. And yeah, so for this example I provided for the Short Hills deer hunt in the provincial park near Niagara Falls. So for this hunt, the Aboriginal people only use bow and arrows, and I know it's not the same as using a gun because there's a chance for them not to be killed right away, so they're suffering and they endure more pain throughout. But they have been using more like a modern bow and arrow, like anyways, and to give some numbers and put in perspective, for this hunt per year, it's only 35 to 50 deer are taken, and it's pales in comparison to a negative amount of deer which non-Indigenous people consume around the same time of year, which is 3,000 times more. It's like 3,500 during the same time. So yeah, and I would also just like to add, like for me personally, like I haven't hunted. I've had uncles, and my grandpa was a huge hunter, and I guess from a young age, like I could never bring myself to like actually go and take another life. And I guess it's been inherited in me since I was young not to harm any other life. And I it's part of in Anishinaabe culture. It's a rite of passage for teenage boys, and it didn't resonate with me. So I never went through that passage. But I didn't feel the need to assert my masculinity or my indigenous identity by taking the life of an innocent animal.
Yeah, and thank you, Eric. And there's been a little bit of chat saying that question in itself was not a respectful question, and was what was the word? Ignorant. So Eric, I think Eric probably wouldn't have answered the question if he didn't feel it was worth answering. Eric handled it with grace. Thank you, Eric. But again, this is an example of, is this an example of a white ally, stepping up to protect, somebody that is in a marginalized community? Is that an example that sort of works? Or Eric, do you feel that was a question you would have liked to have answered?
Yeah, I was comfortable with question or answering that question. Mm-hmm. And like we touched on before, although like I agree, like it's best for allies to step up and to I don't agree with cancel culture at all, because as soon as you silence someone or cancel them out for whatever they've done, big or small, that individual is going to continue doing that throughout their community, other communities, and they're just going to continue down that path. And until someone actually holds them accountable and brings it to light, it's just going to continue that behavior, whatever it may be. So I feel like cancel culture is not the way, but counsel culture is the way, and having that open dialogue and remaining vulnerable. If both parties are vulnerable, then true dialogue can happen, and that's where that connection happens.
Very, very wise words. Thank you, Eric. And it's not necessarily what everybody would feel, but I think it's a lovely thing to be able to hold. And so thank you very much for giving us your viewpoint on that. Okay, let me see here. We have Christy asks, I want to be an ally, but I am white. I feel like I should stand back to leave space for BIPOC voices. I know that my voice can be effective in my community. As I grapple with this, I'm a bit scared to create the content I want to create. Does anyone have thoughts on how to be an effective ally, leveraging my privilege to educate my peeps and uplifting others? Does anybody want to step in on that one? Matt Noble, my partner, is saying amplify BIPOC voices. Go ahead, Isaias.
I think one is the fact that like I usually get messages of people saying, I love your work, I love what you do, I support you. But the second that something is seen in the animal rights movement, especially recently with mainly BIPOC vegans being blasted and sent a lot of hate messages, a lot of allies turned away or did not want to involve themselves in that. And so protect us in the sense of having these rough conversations with those people who are inflicting harm. Also hold them accountable, hold your family and loved ones accountable. And if you're in, allyship does not end within a month, as the Black Lives Matter squares, like all the brands and people who posted it. Where is your allyship now? It's been more than 6 months. And so I think that, long-term allyship should look sustainable and regenerative for someone. And so that means that you should confidently engage in something that you feel truly aligned with, while also recognizing all of these other issues. And so taking that as a step at a time, because what I've seen is that sometimes, people, especially allies, they don't know what they want to do. And so they dedicate themselves into something that wasn't really for them, or in a sense, they don't feel comfortable truly to dismantle their biases, and then end up having a lot of mental health issues. They don't have energy to have these conversations. And so practice sustainable or regenerative activism, where you can actually confidently engage with it in years, rather than just saying, oh no, like BLM, let me just post a black square and I'm good for the month. Like that's not how it works. And redistribute your wealth if possible. Not even to individuals, maybe organizations that need funding, because as we've seen, animal organizations, even though they receive the most funding, BIPOC owned animal organizations receive the less funding. And why is there a lack of diversity there too? So.
Yeah, Paige is asking, how do we amplify these voices? And so you said you're saying money. I mean, there's also like just taking people's actual words, like these wonderful panelists tonight, and putting them out there. Make a meme about it, credit them, show where you can find them and follow them and learn from them. Anybody else have any suggestions on how to amplify voices?
It was said perfectly, and you hit on something so important, that people get into this and they have mental health issues as a result, because it's heavy. This is not, like I said, it's not all fun stuff. And so try to, if you're going to do it, stay within your limits or your reality or your lane. And maybe it's just social media, to where you're sharing on social media some voices. If you have influence, or you are next to someone that is influential, say, hey, did you check out so-and-so? Is a great speaker. Maybe you want to do this or give to this, if you know of resources of how, because funding is definitely something that nobody's going to turn down. Like that is a huge issue. Share funding resources, pay, share, amplify. There's so many different things that you can do. Just as if you are amplifying, if your best friend got on social media and said something amazing, or you were in awe of someone, like just do that. Like you don't have to do any huge pivot or do anything miraculous. You're just highlighting someone that's an amazing human being, and they just happen to be part of the BIPOC community. So just do what you've been doing, or just step it up a little bit, but stay within something, like Isaias said, that is comfortable, that will not burn you out, that will not cause mental health issues or cause you to feel resentful. Stay within something that, feels safe to you, until you can keep leveling up to where, because that's all we're all doing anyway, is leveling up and evolving. So just stay safe.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Can I add a thought to that as well? Because it reminds me, one time when I was giving a talk on sexual and gender diversity, a very well-intentioned person approached me afterwards and asked, I'd really like to be more of an ally, but I'm a heterosexual cisgender man. So how can I speak for members of a group that I'm not a part of? And I said, it's all a spectrum. The spectrum of sexual and gender diversity includes heterosexual and cisgender people. You are not speaking about another group of people as something that is separate from you. We are all on the same spectrum. And so we're all speaking about and for each other. And so the idea that I can't speak for a Black person or an Indigenous person, I think only separates us further. When there is I understand that there's power dynamics of white and colonial histories and all of these that we have to be deeply, deeply aware of and sensitive to, and learn and listen. But when the barriers are broken down completely, then we are speaking for another human being. We are speaking for a member of our family, the brotherhood, the sisterhood, the transhood between us all. And so I would hope that by learning and growing, it happens quite naturally and organically. And by listening to others, it becomes a part of our language. So it's a very natural process.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And going back to the messiness, we can't be afraid of messing up. Like we're going to mess up. I've messed up all the time. I probably messed up tonight by putting that question to Eric. I'm sorry. And I apologize if that was, not a good move. So I get it. I'm always learning. And the faster that we can be able to listen and adjust and take responsibility, the better it's going to be. And I'm learning all the time. So don't be afraid to put your foot in it. Just do something. So I want to just a couple of things before we have to end tonight. And that is, I want to first of all mention just some of the other modules or panels that you'd be interested in if you enjoyed this one. We have next Thursday, the Collaborating with Indigenous Rights Movement on Animal Protection on Thursday, February 18th. In this week's modules, we have Michelle Rojas Sotos is doing a module on creating racial equity in the AR movement. We also this week have Angela Lee talking about animal justice equals food justice equals social justice. Lots of things to take in, folks. And I'm sure there's going to be lots of discussion in our Facebook group tomorrow about possible reading lists and other things to watch. I'm looking forward to seeing all those resources come out. Now, before we leave, very importantly, we now have an AJA action that I think we're fired up about. We're fired up about Calvin and his initiative. So Calvin, how can we help you? How can we get behind you? This 5,000 person strong Animal Justice Academy, what can we do?
Well, we have just launched a brand new petition. It's on change.org. It is Stop the Prison Industrial Goat Farm. I've been in this for 5 years. We are at crunch time. It is a critical moment. And if we rally all of these different communities and all of these different people to sign and share this petition, we have a very real chance of stopping the construction of the largest goat farm in Canada, and one that's bringing in human rights violations and environmental degradation. And it's the wrong model for a federal program. And all we need is a united community to send the message to the Canadian government that goats don't belong in prison. And we can and will stop this.
It could be the biggest goat farm in Canada, right? And it's a horrific kind of construction, like the design they have. I mean, it's just so mechanical. It is just absolutely on so many levels, so damaging to our friends that are in prisons. It's so damaging to the animals. It's just got so many aspects that are just, we got to get on board with, folks. So what we're going to do is we are going to, tomorrow, we're going to have social media graphics for you that in case you want to be able to amplify this online, but we're also going to ask you to think about other ways of being able to spread the word, because this week we're talking about advocacy in our communities. So who do you want to talk to about this? If you're having a work meeting, a Friday work meeting tomorrow, can you at the end of that meeting get everybody to sign that petition right there and then? At your Zoom happy hour with your family, get everybody online to do that. Where can you use your communities, your skills, your background to be able to bring some light to this? And Calvin has told me that we especially could use international pressure for all of our international folks. This is a really big one for you. You could really help amplify this to put pressure from other countries on our government. So we're going to really help you to figure out how to do this tomorrow. But what I'm going to ask in just a moment when we go to our breakout rooms, our breakout groups, is that you brainstorm on how you can do this. But we're going to let our panelists go because they've been so extra generous with their time. I just want to read a couple of things to you folks. Their comment: everyone is so amazing and well-spoken. Our movement needs more like you. Sarah said, this is my favorite panel. all in caps like that. Someone said, this is my first panel and so thankful for all the wisdom. Thank you to all the panelists for their hard work. And somebody said, Gwenna, we will get you a warm coat and boots. So come on home. Can we please give a big warm hand to our panelists tonight? Woohoo! Do we love them? Kisses. Mwah, mwah, mwah. And we will share this petition. We will get busy on this. And Calvin, we're showing up for you, okay?
Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming, and we really appreciate your participation. PJ, Gwenna, Calvin, Isaias, and Eric, you were just so beautiful for us. Thank you.